We could use your help keeping the Omaha History Podcast going. Please consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month. Go to patreon.com/Omaha. That's Patreon. It'll help pay the light bill.
Welcome to the North Omaha History Podcast with noted author and historian Adam Fletcher Sassy. Each week, Adam takes you on a guided tour through Omaha's dynamic past.
Some places hold the memories of North Omaha's past more eloquently than others, while some of North Omaha transitioned from country estate to suburban bliss, from commuter haven to neglected hood. One building has stood steady in the community throughout almost everything. It's called the Sherman. Tell us about it, Adam.
There was a time in North Omaha when the idea of having giant, grand Greek and Roman-style temples was in everybody's imagination. They wanted tall columns and they wanted gigantic windows. They wanted open spaces and they wanted to walk into regal, formal environments right in North Omaha. Those times, they fill my imagination still today, Steve, more than 120 years later. You see, that's the legacy of the 1898 Trans-Mississippian International Exposition. If you can imagine, there was a time before 1900 when Sherman Avenue, that's North 16th Street to you and I today, but back then it was called Sherman Avenue. It was a country road. And this country road shot north, and it went to the old town of Saratoga, and it eventually got to Florence. But along the way, it led by these estates with grand, shady lanes leading out to big mansions, big views of the river valley, all kinds of wonderful things beginning to grow. Back on the west side of 16th, there were open farmlands and orchards. There were big landholders, these guys, Charles Maine and J.J. Brown and all kinds of different early industrialists in Omaha. They had all these places going on. Eventually, all that changed. And it moved from being a serene country life into a suburban dreamland. And one building, Steve, one building opened the door for all the rest to become that. Now, it was influenced by the 1898 Trans-Mississippi Exposition. But when this building was built, it was different from every other one in the whole entire neighborhood, including those expo buildings. It was the Sherman Apartments. Named for the street where it stood, the Sherman is still today a beautiful testament for everything that came after, good and bad. You know, grocery stores, pharmacies, movie theaters were all put there with the streetcars and the paved roads that came in. But this first post-Victorian outpost, it set the pace for North Omaha's future. It was designed in 1897 and built that year, designed by an architect in town, a popular architect named Frederick Henniger. Henniger, he was responsible for all kinds of things throughout the city, but this was his first and foremost real stab at how beautiful it was. A guy named George Payne, who was involved in a lot of other things, Payne, he developed it. He wanted to make the money off this land, and he knew that a fine apartment building was exactly what Omaha needed to see. The Sherman was one of the first apartment buildings in Omaha. There was only one built just a month before it, and today it's the oldest left in the city. Now, inside of the Sherman, there were 12 apartments. Each one had 6 rooms. They had hallways, bathrooms, storage rooms, closets, marble washstands, oak floors, clawfoot bathtubs. Imagine the oak finishes throughout each one. There was a large front porch on each home. It was a 3-story building. It is a 3-story building. It has a huge basement. Eventually, there were more apartments put in the basement, but originally there were 2 big laundries and a steam drying room, as well as bicycle storage in the basement. Steam heat throughout the entire building. That was really rare in 1897, along with gas stoves, electric lights, electric doorbells, speaking tubes, and a telephone in the building. Now, speaking tubes, imagine that. You're in one room, you want to talk into the next room. Telephones aren't popular yet. Nobody has a cell phone. So instead, you're talking to a tube into the next room, and you're heard. It was built right on the corner of Sherman and Madison Street. That's called Katy Avenue today. And originally, it was one of the hottest addresses in the whole city. The Sherman was. There were doctors who lived there, lawyers and bankers, executives who were bachelor executives, and single women who had really good paying jobs all the way through the 1950s and into the 60s. The style of the building is called Greek and Roman Revival. It's because it has these huge columns in the front that hold up porticos. They have these triangles on the top. They're called pediments. And there are two of these sets of columns that hold up porches on the north and south ends of the west side of the building. It was built across 4 lots, and it was chosen, the site was chosen because it was close to the expo, and people would see it as they went on the streetcars all the way up to the expo. And it sat right at the end of Lake Street, so it was this great location. There was a grocery store to the south of it. There were all kinds of businesses on the other side of the street, and you can imagine that 16th and Lake intersection. There were 2 streetcars that met right there, so it was a kind of a layover spot, and it was super busy. There was all kinds of businesses right there. In 1898, the Sherman had made so much money that it was sold right away to another firm in order for a new group of people to make money and for the initial investor to get out. So they continued to rent the address for top dollar. They got $55 a month, which in 1898 was really big money, Steve. So you can see why all these professionals would live there. It helped live up to its name. The construction of the Sherman made 16th Avenue really fashionable. Like all kinds of different apartment buildings were built up and down the strip just because of the success of the Sherman. There was a place called the Majestic that was just up the street that was built in 1906. The Strelo Terrace was built just down the street, still stands there today. It's called the Ernie Chambers Court. That was built between 1906 and 1916. The Ivy Apartments were nearby. They were built in 1910. The Margaret still sits down the street. It was built in 1915. And the Bettner and Rosewell Court Apartments were built in 1924, just up the street. The Fairfax was right there. So all kinds of rich and expensive and fancy places to live were right on North 16th. It was seen as important from the day that it was built. But even in 1929, when it was just over 30 years old, the apartment was also already being called historic and vital to the development of the city. People understood what they had in their hands at that point. Imagine the whole thing in dark red brick. That's what it looked like originally. And it had fine white columns that were holding up those porches and porticos. In the 50s, they built 2 other apartments in the basement, took out the laundries, and the outside was painted white in the 1990s. But one of the most important owners that people talk about in the life of the building, she was called Rusty, Catherine Turner. Rusty Turner, she owned the building from the 1960s all the way through into the 2000s. She tried selling it in 1975, but it was, it didn't do well. And she took control of the building again. She repossessed it from the people who were trying to buy it. She actually lived here in Washington State, nearby where I live today. But Rusty flew back for several months a year to live in the apartment herself and to upkeep the building. Rusty was renowned for being in her 70s and 80s and working on her own apartment to keep it high quality. Just recently, the Sherman was sold again, but this time sold for $575,000. Now, that's not a lot of money in current Omaha real estate, but as far as North Omaha goes, it's a testament to how well the building is doing. You can go and look at it right now. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places as one of the first buildings in Omaha that really had that role. And folks really see the importance of the building. That was back in 86 when it was put on the National Register. It's an official Omaha landmark. It was named that in 85. So the Sherman Apartments have been important to a lot of people for a long time. And they still are important. They were recently purchased and they're being restored and made sure that they're upkept really nicely. And if you go to my website at northomahahistory.com, you can see some photographs of the outside, and I'm looking forward to getting some pictures of the inside. But it's still a magnificent property and something to definitely celebrate in the history of North Omaha.
Thanks for listening to the North Omaha History Podcast with noted author and historian Adam Fletcher Sassy. Join us next week as Adam takes you on another guided tour through Omaha's dynamic past.